Right.
Because what are you doing when you're, what happens when you're so lost, you're so cut off that there's nothing. You have to just recreate the world. And
right.
the first thing you do when you recreate the world is you create the Sabbath.
Right. I thought that was a very empathetic answer. I mean, it sort of give you license to do that. So you can recreate a kind of order,
Yes.
You can go from sort of extreme lostness to kind of extreme omnipotence and control,
That's right.
Was very...
You create an order of time. The order of time turns out to be more important than anything else. It's the first thing you have to create is the order of time.
Right. So this is a natural transition to, a concept that you talk about, which I think, has applicability to so many different areas. You've written for XX a little bit about sort of motherhood and time, but I think the social morality of time. I mean, what do you mean by the social morality of time? And you can illustrate using the very kind of literal experiment that you mentioned, of sort of what's time worth and what are the ethics of it.
Right. Oh, right. Yes. Well,
it's
what I mean by the social morality of time is very simple. It's a cool phrase that I make much of because my husband utters it in the first, few pages of the book. But what I mean, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, there was a click. What I mean is that the way we organize our time as a society has moral meaning. It means something morally. It can make us better or worse. If we to boil it down to the very simplest, if we make time for each other, we will be a better society. Mm-hmm. And if we don't make time for each other, and we only have time for ourselves, or we only have time for our work, or we only have time to make ourselves richer, we will be a worse society.
So when it's taken away, I guess you're forced to think about it.
Right. So in the book, I say that the Sabbath is a machine for manufacturing social solidarity.
Right.
What do I mean by that? I mean that if you say you were like the priest who wrote the Bible and codified the Sabbath in the Babylonian exile in the 6th century before the Christian era, say you were trying to take a very uncohesive, very scattered, and probably pretty demoralized group and restore a sense of community to them and cohesion to them. I say the Sabbath is it's a darn good tool for doing that. Why? Well, first how does it work? It's a 4-step program, I say. First, you write laws to limit work time. Mm-hmm. Then you set aside one particular time that everyone doesn't work at the same time.
Right.
And that's how you create the shared time that we were talking about. Then you make sure that it happens regularly so that people get in the habit of it. And I have a whole riff in the book about the terrible importance of habit. Very few things happen if they aren't habitual.
Right.
And then you make it festive.
Right.
You make it. You make sure people eat, that they drink good wine and eat good food. And, there are a lot of laws in the Tractate Shabbat about dressing up. Right. Wearing fancy clothes. It's a festive time. It's a fun time.
Right.
And, then you have one day a week. The week, of course, is a product of the Sabbath, so it's sort of funny to say you have one day a week as if it were just an accident, because the week is created by means of this institution. But you have one day a week. Right. You have this happy day when everybody gets together and is relaxed and is themselves and has time for you, has time for books, has time for culture, has time for their children, and, of course, the primary consideration of the priest who wrote the Bible, time for God.
Right.
Thank you. Yes, exhilarating way. Exactly. And there's this sense in the New Testament that you're just leaving Jewish time behind and you're entering this much more charged, much more immediate, much more exciting time.
Yeah, it's like that versus the tax collector, for God's sake. Like, which one would you want to be? Which world would you want to be a part of?
Right. But I call the chapter "The Flight from Time" because I think and I don't get explicit about this, but I feel this very strongly, and I tried to do it through juxtaposition of different passages. I feel as though there's a way in which in our society we're in the same kind of flight from time. The strictures of time, the heaviness of natural time, daylight, nighttime. We've gotten rid of that with light, with artificial light, and the heaviness of sort of the old-fashioned rules of work time and of shopping time, and all of that. We've become very light, very Aslan-like in our ability to just rise above all these strictures and structures and just float in time. And I think it's very appealing And in the end, I think it's very dangerous.
Oh, this is so interesting because you're right. This is, that phrase mobile time. It does sort of, it does bring this idea that you're kind of liberated from any kind of plotting time. So why do we experience this as oppressive, interestingly? Like, why is it dangerous? Just kind of elaborate on that.
I think the reason it is dangerous is, I think it's it's Stalin's continuous work week.
Right.
Is the danger. We wind up, the problem with this continuous mobile time is that we will erode the boundaries that were put in place to protect us, to protect, our time for each other, to protect our time away from work, to protect our time away from shopping.
Right.
There's no moment when you're checking your Gmail when you're not being monitored by Google and being,
right.
And having Google trying to sell you something.
Right.
There's no moment when you're not in that kind of instrumental relationship with them, or
right.
commercial relationship with them.
Right.
We're losing the ability to sort of recognize that there are other things, and that we need to make time for those other things, or we won't have them.
The Washington Post, I'm sure one could tell 10 million stories like this, but they had a story that got into this the other day, and the lead illustration was about a guy who was, he was doing a sort of chess move. He was in the middle of a chess move on his iPhone, and he saw sort of an opportunity to execute a particular chess move that came up at that moment, and, he was sort of so intent and fixated on, he was in the bath giving his daughter a bath, and suddenly he felt the water on his feet, because the bath had overflown. It was like a nice imagery of sort of what happens when, the plot, the sort of tick of the water kind of going to the bathtub, which is the plotting time. You become totally disconnected. You're living in your kind of completely own sense of space and time, and what weirdness happens out of that.
Right. There's this powerful dematerialization
right.
of the world that is sort of happening in this other time.
Right.
So I have a whole riff about the space of places and space of flows. Let's not get too technical here, but yes, I think we're at risk of letting the world disappear out from under our feet.
Right.
And we need the world.
Right. Right. And that's
the
part
world
of this
needs
book.
us to have time for it, or it will disappear. Bad things will happen to it too.
Right. And I think that's the part of the book that's so kind of important and accessible. And, much of it is incredibly interesting, but that part is so kind of urgent and relevant. I had a lot of other things to talk about, but that's sort of rounded off. We're coming on the hour. The thing I think I want to end with is just sort of where you are now, which is very interesting and complex, kind of in terms of a rabbi, in terms of your children, just kind of the place you've come to after all this intellectual exploration and thinking about this.
Well, there's two places I came to, and I'm going to give the plotting answer first and the better answer second.
Uh-huh.
The first place I came to is I knew that at some point I was going to have to issue policy prescriptions, because after all, it's a nonfiction book, and I decided I could. And I do. And policy prescriptions I issue are, number one, in your own life, think about time. And number two, as a society, we need to do more to protect non-work time. We are the most I developed this principle, which I call Sabbatarianism. It's not like the Sabbatarianism of the Puritans. It's my own idea of Sabbatarianism. We are the least Sabbatarian nation in the world, from having actually been historically the most. That is, the United States.
Right.
And we do the least in terms of vacation time, in terms of family time, in terms of protecting people from shift work that breaks up their family and creates, the specter of Stalin's continuous work week with families never able to get together and things like that. So there are some things we can actually think about. I don't say these are the laws we must pass, because I don't know what laws we must pass. I'm not a legal.
I like your flirting with the blue laws, though. I was I was tempted by that. That was, it was just a sort of half sentence, but still.
It happened. Amos Oz recently in Israel gave a speech in which he said, in Israel the Sabbath is either a religious Sabbath or a shopping Sabbath, and we need something in between.
Right.
And so does America, in my opinion. But what that would be, I think, I do not pretend to have the answer.